And so I am going to turn it over to A.C. Wharton, former mayor of Memphis and former mayor of Shelby County, to introduce our next speaker. A.C.?
Thank you, Renee, and good morning. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. And no, I was not absent when Governor Henry gave me a shout out. When I was mayor, I had folks to put money in the parking meter for me, but I still have to run to the parking meter every once in a while. And so it's tough, it's rough out here, but I'll make it. Again, good morning to all of you. I really don't know why I am up here, because everything I can tell you is in your booklet. I will say this: we need to annotate that and update it, because since this was printed, according to what Al told me, something else has happened. I came in this morning, and before I had gotten my coffee, I asked Al, I said, anything happened since I last read this? And he said, yes, I won the Nobel Prize. Keep in mind, I did not have my coffee yet, so being from Lebanon, Tennessee, I said, where is it? And he said, oh, I got to go get it. I said, okay, I'll wait. Did you get it yet?
It's still being shipped.
It's being shipped. They must have not used FedEx from Memphis, Tennessee. It would be here had they used FedEx. Give FedEx a big cheer. Good morning again. My job to introduce Al Race. Al is the Deputy Director and Chief Knowledge Officer at the Center on Developing Child, this is I'm not supposed to say much, at Harvard University. His focus is on how to use the knowledge generated by the center's work internally and externally in order to transform the landscape in which science-based innovation for children and families facing adversity can thrive and grow. He's a member of the senior leadership team at the center, has a number of responsibilities, one of which, as indicated earlier, working externally with groups such as this to spread the word of the good work he is doing. And without anything more, I bring to you Al Race. Al, come on up.
Thank you, appreciate it. Well, it's such an honor to be here with all of you and to be introduced by Mayor Wharton. I met just last night for the first time, and I'm fascinated by his career and the impact that he's had. It's really an honor to be introduced by him. And to be here with all of you. I admit I knew there was something going on in Tennessee, but I didn't know the extent of it until I came down here and started really learning about all the things that you are doing, and it is quite impressive. I'll also back off a little bit from what Nat said earlier. He's a tough act to follow, but I'm not going to talk about framing today, but you will see as I go through this that I'm using framing. And those of you who are familiar with the framing work that Nat's done will see a lot of it represented in here. I started thinking of myself as a super user of framing research, and I think all of you either are or will be super users soon. So I think what I'm going to show is kind of how to integrate that into the messaging that you think is important to communicate. So what I want to focus on actually today is, it was interesting what the governor remarked on this morning about the theme of this conference, and I thought about it and thought, really what I'm talking about is imagining possibilities. I want to kind of push you all to build on the successes that you've had so far and really imagine the possibilities of impact on children and families and the possibilities of innovating and what that entails. So, no presentation by someone from the Center on the Developing Child would be complete without some science. So I'm going to start with some science. So The idea that there is this body of science that can help us to understand the disparities that we know about and have known about for decades is not new. But what's new is that there is new science. In the last decade, there's an incredible amount of new science in biology, in neurobiology, in epigenetics and genetics. All kinds of different fields have opened up this black box. So we've known for decades that there are these disparities in outcomes for children. On the one hand, you have children who do well in learning and behavior and health and well-being, and on the other hand, you have children who don't. We haven't ever really understood why or how that happens. We've had some sense that there's this combination of factors between supportive experiences and negative experiences, between parents and genes, and they all go into a child growing up, and come out the other side comes these outcomes. What the science can help us do is see that all these things do in fact have a role, but they interact with each other. They shape each other and change each other. And now we can begin to look at the molecular level to see what's actually going on inside the body as a result of all those external factors. So I'm going to look at one in particular. How many people here have heard of epigenetics? Wow. What a crowd. That's amazing. So I will try to tell this in a way that doesn't bore you, because you all are experts on epigenetics. What happens is an outside experience comes down and triggers in the cells. This is a neuron. So it triggers the release of these regulatory proteins. The proteins go down the axon into the nucleus where the genes are. The genes contain instructions for the rest of the body. The gene regulatory proteins attach themselves to these little stems on the outside of the gene. Epigenome means outside of gene. They attach themselves to these little stems called histones in a particular pattern. That pattern forms a signature. The signature either authorizes the gene to express its instructions or not, or it turns it up and down. It's more like a rheostat than an on-off switch. It can be all the way on, it can be part way on. And so this is actually, we can actually see now inside not only the body, but inside the nucleus of cells to see how it is that external experiences get inside our bodies, shape our biology, shape our genetic expression. Imagine the possibilities if we could harness that to release the genetic possibilities, the genetic possibilities of every child. I'm the communicator, right? So imagine those possibilities if we can provide the kinds of experiences that would release the genetic potential of every child. You all have seen this metaphor too. This is the resilience scale that Frameworks helped us to develop. I'm not going to talk about it as a framing mechanism or a metaphor. I'm going to talk about it as a way of explaining the biology of what's going on inside the body. So this metaphor was created in collaboration with a group we run called the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child, which consists of the leading neuroscientists, developmental psychologists, and biologists in terms of child development in the country. And they all agreed that this is a good explanation for what's actually going on inside the body. So you've heard about this, the scale, where if you put enough good things on one side, it'll tip the scale toward positive outcomes. Bad things on the other side will tip it toward negative outcomes. But there's this thing in the middle called fulcrum. Oh, these are the kinds of things that you can put on the good scale, on the good side of the scale. These are all important. You'll see that some of them come from the community, like community services. Some come from the kinds of experiences that will help children build a sense of mastery that's critical for overcoming adversity. But if that fulcrum starts on one side or the other, it may make it easier or more difficult to tip the scale toward positive or negative outcomes. That fulcrum kind of represents your genetic predispositions. But as we just saw, those can change. Those can change according to experiences. They can change prenatally. They can change, especially in early childhood. They can change by providing the right kinds of experiences that'll shift that fulcrum. One thing we can do throughout life that'll shift that fulcrum is help people to build the adaptive skills that they need in order to be able to adjust to challenging situations, to plan ahead, to set and meet goals. And you'll hear a lot more about those skills as we get further into this. But this is biologically accurate, even though it's just a metaphor. And it's reflective of this new science that shows us what's going on inside the body as a result of experiences. So rather than rehash all the science that you've heard over the last 3 years, and that is available on our website, among many others, I'm going to try to boil this down into 3 fairly simple concepts that are based on science that we can use to think differently about the things that we do for children and families. And you all in this room know better than anyone in the country how those problems that are a result of early childhood adversity are big, costly problems for all of us. And so I'm going to encourage you to use these concepts as a new lens for thinking about how well aligned the services and programs and policies we provide are with the science of child development. Here's the first one. Responsive relationships and positive experiences build strong brain architecture. You all know about serve and return. This applies not only to children, it also applies to adults who need positive relationships as well. So what I'm going to show you now is what happens when serve and return is not available.
Built into our biology is the need to have responsive interactions with adults.
Neglect for children is when they don't get what the brain is expecting to get, what the child is expecting to get, what we are biologically prepared and waiting for, which is input from those around us.
It's this back and forth serve and return interaction that literally shapes the architecture of the brain.
Serve and return begins when a child looks at something or observes something, makes an utterance, and that represents the serve. And the return is when the parent notices the child doing these things and responds to the child.
Under conditions where serve and return is broken, you literally are pulling away what is the essential ingredient of the development of human brain architecture.
It was a really compelling series of experiments where they started by videotaping the mother and the baby engaging in cooing and smiling. And then they asked the mother to basically put on a blank face and not respond at all. When a baby is not attended to, that is a sign of danger to the baby biologically. So the stress systems become activated.
In a brain that is constantly bathed in stress hormones, not that's up and down, that comes with normal development, certain key synapses, the connections between nerves, fail to form, and critical regions of the brain.
So neglect both fails to provide the stimulation that's needed to develop the basic architecture, and when it's at a certain level, is one of the most potent activators of the stress biology of a young child. So you get a double whammy.
So I also want to talk about what happens when children do get serve and return. And I want to focus this one particularly on literacy skills, but imagine that this same idea applies to social emotional skills, to a whole range of kind of foundation-laying skill development that happens for children. This one, I'm going to focus on literacy because third grade reading scores are such a big interest for a lot of folks in policy. So if you think about how do we prepare kids to do better in third grade reading scores, starting at age 4 probably isn't soon enough. Because serve and return is laying the foundation for all that comes later. Even before kids can speak, the responsive interaction between adults and children is laying the pathways, the neural pathways, for them to understand that the sounds that come out of their mouth, the sounds that come out of the mouth of the people who are important in their lives, have meaning, have importance, have value, that they can cause a response to an utterance that they make. These are all laying the foundations for then later understanding that those sounds can be connected to objects, to ideas, to feelings, to actions, to people. And with the help of adults, they can later understand that those same sounds that are connected to objects and actions and feelings are connected to marks on a page. Later, they can learn to decipher the marks on a page themselves, and with more help, they can learn to create those marks on a page. Everything that happens is building on what came before. Without laying that foundation, it's much harder to develop those skills later. That's why responsive relationships are so important and why it's our first principle that I want you to think about. The second principle goes beyond literacy skills to think about the core capabilities that we all use to thrive, whether it's in school or in work or at home. Those skills are built over time through practice and through modeling. There's a lot there. I'm going to unpack that. What are those skills? Those are the skills that scientists call executive function and self-regulation. But we all know them in terms of how we use them. We use them to focus our attention and sustain that. We use them to set goals, to achieve those goals, to also to kind of monitor our pathway along toward achieving those goals. We use them to make decisions, to solve problems, to follow rules, to control our impulses, to delay gratification. You'll notice these are all the things that teachers say they would like their children to be able to do when they come to school. They're also the same things that employers say they want their employees to be able to do when they come to work. We think of them as an air traffic control system for your brain, dealing with lots of incoming and outgoing information and trying to make sense of it all, trying to make the right decisions quickly based on a lot of information. I'm going to test your executive function skills right now. Here's how it works. I'd like everyone to get out a pen or a pencil. If you don't have a pen or pencil, you can use your finger. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to tap on the table. So I'm going to tap. Can you hear that? Or should I use my microphone? No, okay. Can you all hear that one? Okay. So this is a test of your cognitive flexibility and your inhibitory control, which are two types of executive function skills. I learned this from actual executive function researchers who do this with children. So this is a real test of these skills. So when I tap once, I want you all to tap twice. When I tap twice, I want you all to tap once. Okay? Pretty simple? All right, here we go. Very good, very good. Congratulations. Well done. So just so you know, the average 3-year-old can't do that very well. The average 5-year-old gets it. So well done. When I first did that, sitting in the audience like you for a researcher named Clancy Blair doing this presentation, there were 2 things that I took away from it. The first one was, it actually took effort. When I heard it, I thought, oh, that's nothing, but it actually took some effort. It took some effort. So what I learned from that is that it actually takes physiological effort to use your executive function skills. It uses brain power, which requires physiological energy. The second thing is, after about 20 seconds, I had it down. You know, it wasn't so hard to learn. Got it. You all were there in probably less than 20 seconds. So what I learned from that is these skills can be learned through practice. No one in this room had ever tried to do that before, but after 20 seconds, you got it down. Now, the more complex executive function skills are a lot more difficult than that test, but imagine needing to apply those skills frequently and drawing on your physiological energy if it's being depleted in other ways. We're going to talk about that a little bit too. But before we do, I want to point out one important thing. So that test was kind of showing the dramatic change between age 3 and 5. And you can see there's a huge spike in the development of skill proficiency and executive function skills between age 3 and 5. But there's another spike up here in the adolescent and early adult years. So what that means is the window doesn't close at age 5. It's an important foundational period, but we still have an opportunity to build these skills in youth and young adults who, by the way, are either having or about to have children of their own. If they haven't had the opportunity to develop these skills themselves in childhood, there is still the opportunity to build them as youth or as young adults. Executive function self-regulation is the latest forming, has the longest trajectory of any set of skills in the brain because it requires the interconnection of multiple regions of the brain that all develop at different times on different schedules. But because it requires all of them to be developed, you can't actually have fully mature executive function skills until you're in your 20s. And anyone who has a teenager at home knows that. So the services we provide for youth and adults can actually help them to build these skills. How? Well, we can provide opportunities for them to practice those skills, particularly in situations that matter to them, that are meaningful to them. We can scaffold them. We can provide just enough support so that they are able to try and succeed, and then try something a little bit harder and succeed at that. We can plan ahead for the obstacles that we and they know they're going to face in applying these skills. We can build on the small successes they have, give them confidence to try the next level, and we can choose goals that are meaningful to them. So for youth, it might be getting your driver's license or applying to college, whatever's meaningful to them. And for adults, there's a whole different set of meaningful goals. We can also deliver services in ways that reduce stress, because stress is a drain on our physiological energy. I'm guessing no one here has ever been stressed before. But if you ever do get stressed, you'll see that it drains you. It drains you. It's tiring. So if we provide services in a way that allow people to more easily meet their own basic needs, if you don't have a roof over your head, or if you are not sure where your next meal is going to come from, it's very hard to apply your long-term planning skills. We can streamline and simplify the way we provide services, and we can use familiar tools, whether it's an app or something else that is commonly used by the people we're serving, so that they don't have to learn something new in order to do this. We can leverage social relationships. This is especially powerful for youth, that they have social relationships and they can be for the good or for the worse. So let's leverage them to be for the good. So I mentioned the drain that adversity takes, that stress takes on your physiological energy. And I don't have to explain to anyone in this room the toll that adversity takes on the developmental process through toxic stress. I'm not going to show our toxic stress video. I'm guessing pretty much everybody in the room has seen it at least once. So I'm not going to show it. But I want to reference the fact that toxic stress is not just about what happens in the brain. It does affect brain development. It does affect the cognitive processes. But it also affects other systems in the body. It affects the metabolic regulatory system, the cardiovascular system, the immune system. All of these systems are affected by the ongoing activation of the stress response system. If you think about the stress response system as sort of a car engine, then it's good to be able to rev that car engine to pass a truck on the highway. It's not good to sit in your driveway with that pedal pressed to the floor for hours or days or weeks on end. You do that and eventually your engine's going to give out. The same thing happens to bodies that have their stress response activated for hours, days, weeks, months, years. Think of the toll that takes on the whole body. It also affects our ability to use the skills, the cognitive skills, the executive function and self-regulation skills that we do have. So here's how it works. In early childhood, if we're experiencing stressful stimuli, it's triggering that automatic response in the brain, the impulsive response. If that gets triggered over and over and over again, that's the part of the brain that's going to develop most. The intentional side, the side of the executive function and self-regulation skills, is not getting the practice that it needs. It's the automatic responses that are getting all that practice. So they'll get overdeveloped, and the intentional skills will get underdeveloped. In adulthood, the same thing happens, except it's not in a developmental mode. It's more in a situation of the automatic response kind of overpowering the intentional skills. I think most of us who have been in an emergency situation recognize that it's really hard to kind of pull out that long-term plan when you're faced with an emergency. And that's because out of survival, our automatic response center gets activated. If that gets activated over and over again, then that becomes the automatic response. So our impulsive responses become what you do most easily. It takes extra effort to draw on your intentional skills. All right. Now, they told me before I came here today that this was a fun crowd. So I'm going to make you be a little active here. I got another. You thought tapping the table was hard. Wait for this one. All right, we're going to really test your working memory under stress right now, okay? So what I want to do is divide the room in half, and this line right here seems like a pretty good line, except there's two tables where it cuts right down the middle. So I'm going to say this first table that's on this brown line is on this side. That last table, you guys are on this side, okay? Now, everybody on this side, we're going to do a little experiment. So I would like to have a volunteer from each table who's willing to get up and be active. You need to be a little bit of an extrovert for this. Can I get a volunteer? Okay. Everybody who's a volunteer, please stand up. Just one. Yeah, let's cheer for those volunteers. That's good. All right. All right. Your job as the volunteer, your job is to do everything you can to harass within the law. now. To harass, distract, and bother the people at your table, and only at your table. Everybody else is going to play this game with me. This is, you may remember this game called Concentration from back in the day. It's a simple memory game where I'm going to reveal behind these squares a set of matching pairs of symbols. And what you need to do is try to remember where the matches are, okay? So that's tapping into your working memory. So everybody's going to be doing that except our harassing friends here. Our harassing friends here, you represent stressors, lifelong stressors, okay? So do your best to make it stressful for the people at your tables. Everybody ready? You all have no stress in your lives. All right, here we go. We're starting. Okay, you can stop now. Can we have a round of applause for the stressors? That was awesome. All right, so now I'm going to reveal some, and I want to see how many, this is just an honor system here. I want to see how many people think they can remember where the matching pair is. So who remembers where the guitar is? Okay, we got a few over here. Now I'm going to show it. I want you to use the honor system and tell me if you were right. Okay. How about the taxi? The other taxi. Ooh, a lot of people think they know where that is. You got it right? Okay, we'll do one more. The apple. Okay, there it is. All right, on this side, how many people got all of those right? Okay. How many people got two of them right? Okay. How many people got at least one right? At least one. Okay. All right, good. Let's look at this side now. How many people got at least one right over here? Okay, that's pretty good. Two. You guys are cheating. Three. Okay, not too many got three. All right, I'll confess, this is only the second time I've ever done this activity in a group of people, so I wanted to see how it would work. So one of the things I'm going to be pushing you all to do is to take some risks. So I just took a risk doing that. But it seems like pretty much, by and large, this side did better than that side. And for those of you who are experiencing the stressors, what would you say? Was it more challenging than it would have been otherwise? So imagine if that's what you're going through all the time. So now I'm going to give us a minute to all de-stress. This is an actual mindfulness activity that you can do in classrooms to help children de-stress. So you're going to hear a little gong. I want you all to just listen for that gong. And when you stop hearing it, raise your hand. Excellent. Thank you. Thanks for humoring me. So back to those three principles. So I've just given you kind of the scientific foundation for those three principles. I'm going to pull out of that some things that you can maybe use as a framework. The first one, obviously, is that we need to build responsive relationships. That applies to children, applies to adults. Adults also need responsive relationships, not necessarily serve and return, but they need relationships to help them to calm their stress response, to provide practical and emotional support, just as children do. to strengthen core life skills, as we talked about. We can be building the foundation for those starting in infancy, all the way through preschool into adolescence and adulthood. And finally, we need to be able to reduce the sources of stress in people's lives. These all work together. They're not in isolation. If we can reduce the sources of stress in people's lives, they'll have more bandwidth to work on their skills or to engage in responsive relationships. If we can give people responsive relationships, that in fact reduces the stress in their lives. If we can help people to build those skills, that's a way of reducing stress. It's a way of maintaining a stable environment in which you can have responsive relationships. If we can do all three of those things, imagine the possibilities for children and families, where children can have the chance to have healthy development and educational achievement, where adults can provide the responsive caregiving that children need, and the economic stability that allows them to provide the kind of home environment that their children need. So what do I mean by that, by applying this as a lens to policy and practice? So how might we build responsive relationships in policy and practice? Well, we might avoid children cycling in and out of programs so that they have time to build those responsive relationships with the caregivers in their programs. We might try to reduce turnover in childcare and other human service positions so that they can have that relationship in a stable way, in an ongoing way with people who can be consistent presences in their lives. We can provide workers in our service programs with enough time to develop relationships with their clients, whether their clients are children or adults. These are just examples. I'm sure you'll come up with many, many more. But if it's an example of applying this lens of how can we do better at building responsive relationships in the way we provide our services? How about strengthening those executive function and self-regulation skills? Well, we can prioritize funding for programs that provide specific opportunities for people to practice these skills. We can focus on small incremental steps and provide frequent feedback. So the example I have up here is that finding housing is an important goal, but actually doing that requires a whole series of smaller steps along the way. If we can actually break that down for people and check in with them frequently about how they're doing at each step along the way, that's a way of scaffolding the development of their own skills. We can include executive function and self-regulation as a key strand in what Frameworks calls the braided rope of skills that children need to succeed in school. If you think about all the skills that children need to succeed academically, and think of it as kind of an intertwined set of strands in a rope, executive function and self-regulation should be in there. How about reducing sources of stress? You'll see a diaper. That's not because changing a diaper is stressful, although it can be. It's because diapers represent basic needs that some people can't access, that some people have to choose between buying diapers and putting food on the table or paying the rent or the electricity bill. We can help them to access the basic supports they need. That's a way of reducing stress in their lives. If we can provide services in well-regulated and welcoming environments rather than kind of chaotic and hard-to-access environments, that reduces their stress in what's already a stressful situation. We can establish streamlined rules for eligibility and recertification in programs. In other words, that becoming enrolled in a program or re-enrolled in a program shouldn't add to the stress in people's lives. It should be a way of reducing the stress in their lives. So I'm going to encourage you to use these principles as a new lens as you look at policy and intervention strategies. You can look at your current policies and practices. You can look at proposed changes to those practices. You can envision new strategies for dealing with these principles. And remember that you can apply them to policies and services for both children and adult caregivers. You can ask, is one or more of these principles a specific target of this policy or practice? How does what we're doing affect one or more of these principles? And can you measure the impact you're having on one or more of these principles? So speaking of measurement, I'm going to say that measuring what works on average is important. It's what qualifies you as an evidence-based practice. It's the standard in the field, but it's not enough to really achieve breakthroughs. So what I have up here is a whole set of charts that show a trend line from a fairly recent study that kind of replicates what we've known for a long time about the correlation between socioeconomic status and a whole range of outcomes in life. These are 4 different graphs. I'm not going to go into detail on any one, but one of them is language, one of them is visual, spatial, memory, etc. And they all show the same trend. The higher your SES, the greater the better you do on all of these indices. But if you look behind those trend lines, what you see is huge variation. What you see is kids in low SES doing better than some kids with high SES. And huge variation even up and down as you look at that scale. So I'm going to make this a little simpler and say that in order to achieve greater impact at scale, we need to go beyond what is the status quo in terms of understanding the impact of our work. So the current approach basically looks for a significant mean effect, and that qualifies you as being an evidence-based practice. If you have a small to moderate effect on average across your entire intervention. So if you look at this and you see those dots, those would each represent, say, a child and how they did on this particular intervention. And the mean is that yellow line. So we say, okay, this is an evidence-based practice. Let's scale it. But what we need to also ask is, why did it work so well for those children and families? And why did it work so poorly for those children and families? If we can answer those questions, then we can scale the program for those who are most affected by it and people who are similar to them in terms of actionable characteristics. And we can go back to the drawing board and design and test new approaches for the subgroups for whom it's not working very well. If we can do that, we can build a suite of programs and policies that work across sectors to match the different needs and different resources of different children and families. So when I was describing this at a table over dinner last night, somebody said, okay, smart guy, what are you going to do about that? How are you going to answer those questions? Well, so I decided to add a couple slides about that, so bear with me. So to be more precise about the impact that we're having, we need to be able to answer, what about the program works? Not just does it work, but what about it works? How does it work? What actual causal mechanisms is it changing? For whom does it work? For whom does it not work? And in what contexts is it working? A small pilot may well work very, very well in a particular context, and when you try to scale it to other contexts, it doesn't do as well. And we're kind of losing, by doing research on average, we kind of lose the ability to parse that out. So at our center, we've developed something called the IDEAS Impact Framework. IDEAS is an acronym that I won't bother to get into. But it's a set of steps that people can use and a method people can use to help become more precise, to help innovators go from idea to actual implementation, to measurement, to be really, really clear, not just to develop a theory of change, but to understand the root causes of the thing you're trying to change and the specific outcomes that you're aiming for, so that you can determine how something works, for whom it works, and in what context it works. So we do offer workshops on this framework if people are interested in digging more. There's a lot of information on our website about it. I put this up here not to plug our workshops, but just to say there are ways to do it. Ours is not the only way. There are ways to be more precise about what you're trying to do in order to improve impact. Imagine the possibilities. Oh yeah, usable knowledge. Usable knowledge meaning that we're not talking about doing this just to produce more studies and more papers in academic journals. The idea is to create knowledge you can use to improve the impact of programs. So I'm going to wrap up here by just looking at the field as a whole. And now this is a curve that I'm sure looks familiar, but we've adapted this from the work of Everett Rogers, who focuses mainly on for-profit innovation. And he talked about how innovations diffuse across a market. We've adapted this to say, this is about a field. This is about the early childhood field. And to be a healthy field, we need to have a full spectrum of approaches. On the one end, we've got basic quality issues that have to be addressed, safety issues. If we don't address them, we're not even getting out of the gate. And there's a whole lot of people who are working on that, and it's really important work. We're also, a big chunk of the field needs to be all about meeting the standards, today's current best practices, increasing access to the programs that offer best practices. Another really important piece of work. And then once we have those best practices in place, just delivering those constantly and continuing to update and improve them is also critically important. But for this field to be truly healthy, we also need an innovation end. And I know you all are about to launch into the innovation phase of this work in Tennessee. And this is why it's so important. Because we need people who can adapt and scale promising new strategies within existing systems. We're not talking about creating brand new programs or brand new systems or agencies or anything. We're talking about within the existing systems we have, there are promising practices we could adapt and test. But we also need a small segment of the field to be generating and testing those new ideas, tomorrow's best practices. Without those ends of this spectrum, the field isn't going to move forward. So the work you're doing here in Tennessee is making you poised to be able to move the entire field forward. So I'll end with a little bit of inspiration, and then I think we have a little time for questions if you want. There's a lot more on our website I hope you'll take a look. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Al. So we have time for a couple of questions. Does anybody have one? I have a question. So, and I'll try
good
to
that way.
phrase this as succinctly as possible. When communities or schools or any kinds of organizations that are trying to improve outcomes for children try to find the programs that they believe will work and look to the term evidence-based. Unfortunately, sometimes what's evidence-based, as you certainly showed, is evidence-based for a specific population. And how is it that, and we're not talking about scientists or academics, we're talking about people in the field who are trying to find programs that are going to work for their population. What kind of information can they use? Where can they go? They're not going to go to a journal and look at the description of the population and then figure out what the statistical significance is. Where can they go practically for the kind of information that will enable them to make the kind of decisions they have to make?
Wow, that's a great and a tough question. I think the short answer is I don't know. I don't know that such a thing exists. I mean, I know there's a What Works clearinghouse that rates evidence. I don't know how much that says about the context within which the evidence was generated. I know that the journals cover it, but you have to look deep and be able to decipher all the academic jargon. And I mean, I think that the intervention or the program developers themselves, they know for whom it works, maybe not for whom it works, but they know the context in which it works. We've done some work with David Olds of Nurse Family Partnership, for example, and that's an example of a program that's been incredibly well researched and is evidence-based. And even David will say that they've got great evidence for achieving a specific kind of outcome with a specific kind of population in a specific place. And they are still learning about how well it works for other people in other places and other purposes. And so he would be the first to say that it's not a justification for any home visiting program anywhere. Which is not to say that, I don't want to trash evidence-based programs. I mean, they're the best we've got right now. But what I want to say is that it's important to carve out a segment of the field that's trying new things and generating new hypotheses. Unfortunately, I don't think at least if there is a repository of that kind of parsing of the evidence for non-academics, I don't know where it is.
And so I'm sorry that this is kind of self-serving, but I would just recommend one source called Evidence to Success. It began to be developed while I was still at Annie Casey Foundation, and it was an effort to show by outcomes what population-specific programs worked for and what kind of training and technical assistance is provided, and what the cost is, and a calculation for determining if you can afford it based on the budget you have. So I have not been involved with it for several years, but Evidence to Success might be one place to look. So self-serving, but not really, because I'm not there anymore. So any other questions? We have time for one more question before we break for lunch. One more phenomenal question. Okay.
Well, I think everything the science would scream out at us is that it's different for every child. That every individual is different in how that individual responds to stress and responds to intervention. Some will not need an ongoing program or support, others will. There's no one answer, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Okay, so we would like to, can we thank Al again?
Thank you.
Okay, so the information on serve and return, the architecture of the brain, and I'm so happy to know I'm as competent as a 5-year-old. So thank you very, very much.